want to dive into what's been happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota, particularly in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the calls to defund the police and so forth, as well as the crisis that we're seeing spread across the country, particularly in terms of social unrest. But also you've got that exacerbated once again by spikes in coronavirus cases. To talk about all this, I am pleased to be welcomed once again by Roshini Rajkumar, who's a strategic communication and crisis coach to C-suite executives. She hosts Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Real Leaders with Roshini podcast. Roshini's a licensed attorney, a former TV reporter. We call upon her, as others do, to offer commentary on leadership, crisis management, political strategy, PR blunders, and more. Her book is Communicate That, and her website, ownyourwow.com. And tomorrow, by the way, will be Own Your Wow Wednesday, just so you know. Roshini Rajkumar, welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
It's great to be with you, Jimmy. Thanks so much. Lots to get into today.
Absolutely. Well, it is so good to have you on, and especially given everything that we're seeing happening across the country. But I want to go on the ground to where you live, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where everything in terms of this social unrest that we have seen began. What are things like right now, Roshini?
Well, it's still pretty unstable. I mean, we're not having nightly peaceful protests. The regular violence, I mean, it just depends on how you're defining it. You know, we're not seeing a bunch of things burned down, but there have been gunshots multiple days over the last 2 weeks. So there have been deaths. There has been, some of that is called gang violence. But, the people of Minneapolis, and I am a resident of the city, are very confused about the state of things because we have a city council that is moving in the different steps to what they are saying is defunding the Minneapolis Police Department, possibly disbanding it. And you have a lot of citizens wondering, what does that even mean? Because we have not heard a real concrete plan as to what would replace the Minneapolis PD as we know it.
Yeah, and we'll get to that a little bit more here in just a moment with you, Roshini Rajkumar, because on Sunday on your radio show, Real Talk with Roshini, you had the head of the police union in Minneapolis for the Minneapolis Police Union, Lt Bob Kroll, on your program. And I have a few sound bites from that I want to share. And before we get to the defunding of police part of this, I do want to play a clip where he talks about sort of the messaging side in the wake of this, because there were people in the wake of the murder, because there were people across Minneapolis and around the country who were looking for the police to condemn this, but at the same time, the role of the police union is to stand up for and represent the interests of police officers. So you asked him specifically about some of the messaging in cut one here from your program on WCCO Radio, Real Talk with Roshini, this past Sunday.
I never saw you coming out and defending Derek Chauvin. Why or why not?
Well, I think for the political leaders to come out like they did, and I mean the mayor, the governor, the attorney general, the director of the Department of Public Safety, for them to come out with such inflammatory statements immediately, it served nobody's purpose. You need to understand that people were cooped up with COVID for several months. And a storm was brewing, and that really blew the lid off. The inflammatory remarks made by political leadership incited, in my opinion, a lot of the violence that occurred in the week that followed. And I think it was irresponsible, and it was politically driven. My statement came out the following day immediately. When I say mine, the statement from our Federation board. I don't do anything in a vacuum. There's 10 of us on the board that are a part of this, that make the decisions, and we issued a very brief statement saying justice will be served. Please remain calm. This is going to be a lengthy process, an in-depth investigation. The officers are cooperating with the process, and that was it. So I did make a statement the first day. That wasn't the time to take to the airwaves, whether radio, television, newspaper. Our officers were operating in crisis mode for the week following. Our job as police officers were to try and ensure instill safety, calm riots, quell the riots, regain control of the city. And our officers were under attack, quite literally, from everything from rocks and bottles to live gunfire on several occasions. We had a lot going on. The lack of leadership from the city made it even more difficult.
Roshini Rajkumar, I want to compliment you on your interview, by the way. It was very interesting, especially from an outsider's perspective, to hear the take of the leader of the police union in Minneapolis. But I think he made some fairly salient points there in terms of some of the political rhetoric that we heard right after the murder happened. But at the same time, there was a desire upon the public to at least get something from the police authorities there, including from the union, and that didn't seem to really come. So what did you make of that?
Well, here's the thing. He alluded to or outright said, these different political figures condemning, including the chief of police on 60 Minutes a couple Sundays ago, condemning especially Derek Chauvin, but all those officers. And in his role as the head of the union and the union board in its entirety, their job really is to defend police officers. Now, in the years that I've lived in the city and the years that I've seen different press conferences, and there have unfortunately been some deaths by police officers over these past few years, I have seen Lt Bob Kroll come out right away and stick up for officers. And usually that means he feels they are worth defending. And because he did not come out immediately naming any of these names and defending and in defense mode, that spoke volumes to me that they actually did not at all support the behavior of these officers. And they were trying to follow due process and just wait for some of the video from the body cams to come out. And the fact that they have said these different remarks from the mayor, even the governor, but especially the mayor and the chief of police, now in the pretrial hearing that happened on June 29th, the judge is saying because of some of those inflammatory remarks, he may have to move the trial out of Minneapolis.
Yeah, well, that would make perfect sense. You need to have a jury that can be as fair as and impartial as you can possibly find. I would be surprised if they could even have it in Minneapolis, barring that kind of rhetoric, given what happened in the environment there. But your point is an interesting one and important, I think, because it was sort of like a quiet condemnation. If normally he would come out and defend officers in the past, and he didn't in this case, then that was, it seems, a rebuke of that that conduct, without being very descriptive and blatant about it like politicians.
Or without violating his fiduciary responsibility, because as you know, with unions, they cannot speak. I mean, they're almost like the attorney. So it'd be like your own attorney coming out and saying you're guilty. They just can't do that. And that was part of the reason, Jimmy, that I invited him on my show as the first part in a 3-part series I'm calling Crisis in Minneapolis. Now, way back, I did invite him to come on. Full disclosure, he and his wife, who is a journalist in this town, are friends of mine. So early on, I did invite him, and he did not take that invitation. Now, as a friend, I did not push him. You better believe I wanted the first interview. I did not get the first interview. Gayle King did, and some of the other national networks, and then eventually local TV. That all happened last week. And so once that was out, then I revisited it, and he agreed to come on with me. So mine was the first one-on-one radio interview, because most of what he had been doing was a group interview with members of the board. And I disclosed at the top of the hour, the top of this full hour that we spent together, that I know them, they're friends, but he had no idea what I was going to ask him. And I also would not have conducted the interview any differently. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm an ex-TV reporter. I'm an attorney, as you know, and I'm a lover of facts. And that's really what I wanted to get out. And he has been so demonized, vilified in the media across many platforms. I felt it was only fair to really hear in his own words, his voice. And in the following 2 Sundays, I'm getting into things with hopefully the mayor. The mayor and the chief have been invited, but I've got some Minneapolis City Council members coming on. I have the head of Mad Dads coming on this July 5th. So I really want to talk with the different players, because we are in a very big state of limbo in the city of Minneapolis. I'm actually considering moving out of the city. That's how concerned I am about public safety right now. And I felt I can use my platform, as you do so well in your state, to illuminate and to stop the rhetoric and to stop really the name calling, because that's what's been going on.
Again, Roshini Rajkumar is our guest, WCCO radio host in Minneapolis, Minnesota, host of Real Leaders with Roshini podcast, but Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO radio. So I want to play one more clip from your interview with Lt Bob Kroll, again, the head of the police union in Minneapolis for the Minneapolis Police Department Union Federation. This in cut 2 is Lieutenant Kroll talking about the push to defund the police, which is, of course, a very hot-button issue right now. So let's take a listen to Cut 2 again, Lieutenant Bob Kroll on Sunday with Roshini Rajkumar.
On Friday, the Minneapolis City Council voted to put an amendment on the November ballot as pertains to the Minneapolis Charter. And that, what I understand of it, would be the first step toward defunding or disbanding the Minneapolis police as we know it. What were your thoughts about that?
It's unbelievable. I think since George Floyd's death, we are seeing a preview, if you will, of what's occurring if you would defund the police. The police have been completely overwhelmed. We have retirements in mass occurring. They were short to begin with. Let's not forget the chief had asked the mayor for 400 more officers over a period of 5 years, and we've got none of those. We've declined. If you want absolute lawlessness, I mean, let's talk about what's occurred here. We've got $500 million in climbing and damages. We've got 1,500 businesses that are destroyed, many that will not return. We've had 120 people shot in the last 5 weeks. We've had over 10 deaths. And if they want more of this to occur, go ahead and defund the police. And I find it ironic that 3 council members have private security costing the city more than $63,000 to date because they have private security on them, but they won't provide that basic right for the citizens that they're supposed to serve.
Roshini, this debate over defunding the police, especially when we see things like what Lieutenant Kroll was describing is happening in Minneapolis, we're seeing in Chicago, other parts of the country, it makes no sense to me, and I'm curious what exactly this ballot initiative would do, how it would go about approaching the idea of dismantling the police department in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and what your take is on what he said in this defund the police debate.
Yeah, it's very confusing, Jimmy, because a few weeks ago, several members, 9 members, in fact, of the 12-member city council said they wanted to disband, abolish the police, even was some of the words. And then in the kind of 7 to 10 days following, they retracted that a bit and said, oh, no, we want to start a 1-year process to discuss the charter because the charter provides for public safety in the city. There are specific numbers, X number of officers for every however many thousand citizens. So they really went back. They tried to walk back what they originally said. And then they got everyone talking, well, what do you really mean then? And then the mayor and the city council agreed they'd start this 1-year process. They had a resolution. There was no talk about putting this on the ballot. And on Friday, June 26th, just 2 days before my show here, the city council voted to put it on a ballot measure. So those of us who live in Minneapolis would vote. It's the first step in defunding/disbanding the police department. The mayor immediately held a press conference and said, I am completely confused by this. And in fact, I wrote down the words, despite the promise of this 1-year conversation, we're now presupposing an outcome. So he believes the very fact that the city council passed that resolution to put it on the ballot, that they're presupposing the outcome, which is disbanding the police, after he got them to agree to this 1-year charter discussion kind of process. So all of us in the city, I mean, literally people are so stunned, are so confused. Sunday on my show was also the first time since the death of George Floyd, people could directly ask Lieutenant Bob Kroll questions. And I was getting calls and so many texts with people saying good things about the police, with people saying, what does this mean? Let's have the city council walk the streets of Minneapolis on their own and see how safe it was. So we've got a lot of anger in the city. And even though there are people who believe reform is needed for the department, and I agree with that, the relations between the community and police all over the country, reform is needed. But there is no part of me that believes we should disband the police.
Well, just a final question on this, and then we'll shift gears in our remaining minutes with you, Roshini Rajkumar. But in terms of the public sentiment, I mean, how likely do you think this kind of initiative could actually be to pass if it actually goes to the voters? Because it seems like there is a large contingent of people in Minneapolis who would say, no, this just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think you know how I'm going to vote on November 3rd. It would be stunning to me, just stunning, if that ballot measure passes. But that's still, regardless of which way that vote goes, it still leaves us with these months leading up to the election. It's like, come on, we have to have discussions. We have officers that are also resigning, that are leaving. Recruitment efforts were already tough over the last couple of years. They've only gotten tougher. So really, there needs to be some sort of big revamping. But police officers and their families, I'm hearing from some of them, are also in limbo, and they feel they have been unjustly accused of things because of what Derek Chauvin did on May 25th.
Once again, Roshini Rajkumar is radio host of WCCO Radio in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her website, ownyourwow.com. I want to talk now about what's going on across the country, particularly vis-a-vis some of the statues and the civil unrest that we have been seeing. I mean, all around the nation, we have seen statues ranging from Ulysses S. Grant being torn down to Stevie Ray Vaughan's being defaced, which was absolutely stunning to me. I know it's happened before, but my gosh, Stevie Ray Vaughan had absolutely nothing to do with anything relevant to this. And Ulysses S. Grant was the general who literally sat across from the Confederate general and secured the Confederacy's surrender. You have a variety of different abolitionist figures like Matthias Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and many others. And just yesterday, let's put this one up. Just yesterday, we saw that George Washington had a statue defaced, I think, in Washington, D.C. And this one, especially, let's put it up, this one is, there's blood draining down from him, and we are seeing this widespread, and a lot of people, particularly who find themselves affiliated with Black Lives Matter movement, aren't condemning this kind of activity, that this vandalism of people's either private property or public property. Property rights are still an important thing even when it's public property, and yet there seems to be a widespread absence of condemnation, and I don't understand why. I would think that if you're a genuine advocate for the Black Lives Matter cause of supporting greater racial injustice and police reform, why you would want to condemn the radical elements completely eroding your credibility at this point in time. But what do you make of what's happening, Roshini?
Yeah, violence always seems like it hurts credibility. There's no brand I can think of that violence helps boost their brand. I just can't think of it. I mean, maybe certain police organizations or internal kind of intelligence organizations, but even they don't want to be known for violence. At the end of the day, we need to look at the term that you and I have talked about for years on all of your shows, intent. What was the intent of the particular statue? And if we look that the intent was to celebrate someone who brought the Union back together, or to celebrate someone who stopped movement by the Confederacy, or, find what we would agree as Americans is a good intent. Even if they were an imperfect human being, finding that solid intent line helps us keep that statue in place. Now, if the intent can't be found, or if the intent was they celebrated slavery, then absolutely that statue should come down. There was a really great article in this past weekend's, would be June 27th, Wall Street Journal, by a historian, which I found just fascinating. And this historian gives a lot of great analysis as to why a statue, even if it's a flawed human being, deserves to stay, and why, after some discussion, a statue deserves to come down. Part of it is the intent, but part of it is, did that person, even if they were a flawed human being, did they move the country forward? Did they move a cause forward? And if you can say yes, then we right now should not be tearing down They're statues because it's like we're trying to abolish a certain part of our history that actually existed. Now, let's look at a couple men who are definitely adored, and we know they had some controversy themselves, MLK Jr. and JFK. Both of them have been known to be philanderers. Both of them have other flaws from their lives, but both of them did a lot of great things for our country. And both of them have a lot of statues, libraries named after them, monuments named after them. Are we going to go down and bust all of those up? So when I apply this analysis from this historian to JFK or President Kennedy or JFK Jr., I think their statues should remain, just as I feel it is terrible that George Washington's statue got bloodied like that.
Yeah, one thing that I think is important to keep in mind, and it's what you're getting at, is historical context, and that is what is the significance of this individual to the country from that period of time. But there's another point to be made, I think, as well, Roshini, and that is, yes, I mean, there are reasonable calls to remove Confederate statues. I'm from upstate New York and New Jersey. I'm a Union guy through and through. It never really has been something that I understood, the idea of the Confederate statues, but there is a difference between tearing down those statues by force in the midst of a riot or protest and actually going through a legal process to have them removed, because they are property owned by either an individual, a company, or a government, meaning public property. And we value property rights here in the United States. And the idea that you should just tear down a statue, even if it is a horribly unjust statue here in the United States of America, at least the history of that statue, doesn't sit well with me, because we have to respect the rule of law, and you're undermining that whenever you destroy somebody's property instead of trying to go through the legal avenue, as people are doing. In some cases, I don't agree with it. Like there's the Teddy Roosevelt statue at the Natural History Museum in New York City. And my view is, no, don't take that down. You're ignoring the historical context of that statue, but at least they're going through a process to do it the right way, as opposed to let's just have some vandals get together and bring it down.
You know, the other thing, Jimmy, I love that you point out the process. We're supposed to be a nation of due process.
Right.
In that process, we can have teachable moments. And you're literally killing the teachable moments when you just knock these statues down. I mean, I don't know all the history of these statues. I'm older than you, and there are plenty of 10-year-olds out there that have no clue. So we can give these teachable moments from Native people, from Asian people, from Black Americans, from Africans, from white people. I mean, these teachable moments are getting lost, in addition to just being illegal, smashing these things down. And I'm getting very concerned that people want to rewrite history. I mean, let's look at women. If you look at a complete group that's been screwed by history, it's women. Women in America have only had the vote for about 100 years. There's a whole slew of history that women in America have contributed, which was never recorded by anyone. What are we going to do about that? Right? We can't fix that now. So we keep going. And I, as a woman, say, let's celebrate women now moving forward. Let's make sure their accomplishments are noted accurately, just like every other group out there.
I want to look at one more thing with you, Roshini, before we let you go. This is cut 4. Kayleigh McEnany yesterday was doing an exchange with a reporter, and I'm always struck by the way in which they frame some of these questions, especially during this very divisive time where people are just at each other's throats, it seems, sometimes more literally than not, unfortunately, all across the country. So I want to look at this exchange and get your reaction, because I just don't think the reporter's question had any basis in reality.
Kayleigh, there's a national conversation going on right now about the proper place of symbols of the Confederacy, statues, memorials, names, and the president has repeatedly inserted himself into this debate. And I think a lot of people are trying to understand what his view of memorializing the Confederacy is and the proper place of the Confederate flag. So a couple questions. One, does President Trump believe that it was a good thing that the South lost the Civil War? And then two, is he interested in following NASCAR's example and banning the Confederate flag at his own events?
Well, your first question is absolutely absurd. He's proud of the United States of America. Second, with regard to our statues, Americans oppose tearing down our statues. There's a Harvard-Harris poll released just last week that shows 60% of respondents said the statues should remain, and 71% said local governments should block groups from physically destroying the statues. So he stands on the side of preserving our history.
The question was actually about the Confederate flag at his rallies. Is he interested in banning the Confederate flag at his rallies?
That would be a question for his campaign, but look, this president's focused on taking action, on fixing problems. It's why he had his executive order just a few weeks ago to keep our streets safe and secure. That's where his focus lies, and I think that those who are tearing down statues, they do appear to have no ideology when they're tearing down statues and defacing statues of Matthias Baldwin, an abolitionist, Hans Christian Heg, who died fighting for the Union Army during the Civil War, a memorial for African American soldiers who fought in the Civil War was damaged in Boston.
So I think we get a sense there for her response, which I think was very good. But there was Politico's Ryan Lizza, and he literally asked the question, does the president, quote, believe that it was a good thing that the South lost the Civil War? I don't even know what to say.
That's stunning to me. If that is a national correspondent, that you would waste some of the time that you get to ask her a question, you'd waste your microphone time on that. I don't care what party you are, and I'm nonpartisan. That is just ludicrous to me. And I think she responded to it quite well, actually.
Yeah, it really is going to the point that she made absurd to ask that question. And for starters, I mean, President Trump is a New York City guy. He was born and raised in New York City, not in the South, has no sort of ties into the Confederacy and what have you. But that question is just beyond the pale. But I want to ask you this final question when we let you go. In this regard, I mean, the way in which the media is handling this, they claim that it's President Trump that's being the divider and not helping matters. I think people like Ryan Lizza from Politico demonstrate that all too often the media is doing the dividing here.
Well, I think we have a couple issues going on. There are definitely some outlets and some specific columnists or reporters that are divisive. And, the thing is, as a columnist, like you and I are talk show hosts, so we're kind of analogous to what they're saying, what they do. We have opinions, we share them, we're paid to have these opinions. So I'm not going to fault columnists for having opinions, even if we don't agree with them, or I don't agree, or you don't agree. The reporters are who I have issues with. Reporters should not have a slant, should not have an angle, whether that's local or national or regional. They should just be reporting the facts, just like, the 4 officers that are going to be tried in the death of George Floyd. I've been following one of those reporters on KARE 11 here, our NBC affiliate. His whole Twitter feed yesterday, very, very objective, different little points. His name's Lou Ragoose, and I just found it, both as a lawyer, very just matter of fact, just trying to describe what's happening. So we have to be discerning as citizens, who are we getting our news from? Is it a columnist? Because that's not news, that's opinion. Or is it a true journalist? That's what we have to look at. Then we've got the president. And I have been on record with you for his entire term, Jimmy, saying I wish he'd stop tweeting. I wish he'd think a little more before he presses that button, or even when he speaks at some of these press conferences. So he does not help his own case. I would love to coach him and help him get better, but I just don't know that he's coachable. So we've got a combo that is just ripe for disasters every day and bad headlines for the administration every day.
Yeah, I agree with you that more and more I agree with you about the tweeting. It's gotten too, he gets in his own way. I mean, I think that you could trace the number one reason why President Trump may well lose this election, I think, is because of his tweeting and the way in which he gets in his own way. Well, Roshini Rajkumar, always great to check in with you, my friend. Be well, stay safe there in Minneapolis. I hope they do not get rid of your police department. That just is illogical in so many levels.
And I invite your listeners and you, parts 2 and 3 of my Crisis in Minneapolis series. They can access it on the live stream, either on radio.com or wccoradio.com/Roshini. They can even write in their questions, text in, or call in. And I'd love to hear from them, because I think it really does help for other people in other states to hear what's happening here. And hopefully this series can prevent some of the craziness in other parts of the country.
Exactly. One of the big reasons I wanted to have you on today. So for sure. And ownyourwow.com, by the way, is also the place where you can go to find out all the information on how to follow Roshini, listen, all those good things. My friend, thanks for joining us. Stay well and safe, and we'll have you back soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. Roshini Rajkumar once again joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, live on the ground in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thanks for watching this clip of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel. You do not want to miss our live show. Thanks for your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.